Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Ranger Jen at National Mall and Memorial Parks, and we're excited you've joined us for our Teach 250 series. If you feel like being friendly and introducing yourself and saying where you're from in the chat, we'd love to know who's with us tonight. We have a really special program for you, and we look forward to your questions and participation in the chat. This series is made possible by the National Mall's partner, Trust for the National Mall. So we're very excited to have them help us out with this program, and so we appreciate their help. Tonight's program is going to feature one of our neighbors. We're excited to be inviting our friend here to join us and share some resources for teachers. Hi, Susan. Thanks for joining. Ellie Quinlan is here. She works on the public engagement team at the United States Institute of Peace, where she leads visitor programs. And the Institute of Peace has all kinds of educational resources. They have a trail, a peace trail on the National Mall, which we're all going to learn a little bit more about. And so I'm really excited to turn this over to Ellie, who's going to share with us some of their resources. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to throw those in that chat. We're going to maybe save those for the end, unless they're really burning questions you need answers to right away. But please feel free to comment and offer up commentary as we go in the chat. So Ellie, thank you for being with us tonight.
Hello, Jen, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much for inviting us to join you this evening, though perhaps we have folks tuning in where it's not quite evening yet. I'm really delighted to join this Teach 250 session, and we have, I think, a dynamic program in store. During America's 250th anniversary, the United States Institute of Peace will be elevating stories of peace building through our educational resources and in-person programming at our Washington, D.C. headquarters. So first, to set some context, I'll share some information about the United States Institute of Peace, or USIP for short. It's quite a mouthful. And about international peace building. Then we'll explore one of our resources in particular, which Jen previewed, the Peace Trail on the National Mall, which is a resource for general tourists, for classrooms, and for visitors to our nation's capital. We hear often from teachers and tour guides, even those who have visited DC for many years, that they really like this resource for adding a new and deeper dimension to their class trips. And then last, I'll talk about USIP's additional resources for educators, including some evergreen ones, and I can preview some specific new ones for America's 250th. Before we get started, I'm curious to know, has anyone been to Washington, D.C. before? I see Susan in the chat is from D.C., so Susan, you're a local. But if folks have visited, we always like to know what's a favorite place that you saw. And so as folks are joining, you can drop those in the chat box. We'll refer to the chat box a few times throughout the session. It's nice to have a warm-up question to that. So Susan, as a local, I'm curious if you have a favorite place that you've seen or that you visit here in Washington. As Susan does some thinking, I'd like to poll the group with a question we often ask students. And we ask students this whether they're visiting us here in Washington or if we're doing a program with them in their classrooms around the country. Here's the question. Do you think of conflict as negative, positive, or neutral? And our good friends at the Trust, Erin's going to pop this up. Do you think of conflict as negative, positive, or neutral? You can vote for one of these things. We'll give folks a few more seconds to weigh in here, and then we'll go ahead and close the poll and see what kind of responses we've gotten. Okay, it looks like we have a few different responses. A couple folks say that they think of conflict as positive, and a couple more look at conflict as neutral. So we have a couple of votes here. This is really interesting, and thank you so much for taking part. We at USIP view conflict as neutral. We really see it as a normal part of the human condition. And that's something that we really emphasize for students. We hear from students a lot that they're really uncomfortable with conflict and scared of conflict. We want to give them resources and tools to become familiar with it and really see it as a normal part of life. We believe and know from our work around the world that there are practical ways to manage conflict so it doesn't become violent, and that there are nonviolent ways to bring violent conflict to resolution so it doesn't happen again in the future. And our public engagement work helps Americans learn about that peace-building approach to global conflict. The United States Institute of Peace was established by Congress in 1984 to be a national, nonpartisan public institute with a mission to prevent, mitigate, and resolve violent conflicts happening all around the world. Our headquarters, as Jen mentioned, is right at the northwest corner of the National Mall in our nation's capital. And we're going to talk about that in a moment here by embarking on some of the Peace Trail on the National Mall. And our building really serves as a hub for our peace building work that takes place around the world. If you'll indulge me for just a moment, I'm going to share a PowerPoint that can help us learn a little bit more about USIP. So USIP has this mission to prevent and mitigate and resolve violent conflict that's happening. We were created in 1984 with this mission. It was an act of Congress that created this institution. We were first, the idea for an Institute of Peace was really first brought forward by veterans in Congress in the 1960s. We were very much born out of the shadows of the Great World Wars and of the Vietnam War and the Korean War. There were members who had served in those conflicts, found their way into public service, and felt very motivated to create a place within the US government that would focus on peace and really be dedicated to finding nonviolent solutions to peace and trying to prevent conflicts like the ones they had to fight in from happening in the future. So they came up with this idea for a peace institution. Their efforts really accelerated in the 1970s as a result of a grassroots movement of everyday Americans who were also interested in peace and what the US could do globally to build peace. And this came to a head in the late 1970s when you had leadership on Capitol Hill, you had interest in the White House, and you had this broad public support for creating a peace institution. And what Congress and President Jimmy Carter decided to do is to create a commission that traveled all across the United States to talk with the American people about what this would look like. They wanted to know, what would a peace institute look like? What would it focus on? What would it do? And what is this national interest in and commitment to being peaceful and building peace in the global community? So that commission went all around the US. It came back to Congress in the early 1980s with some ideas about what that might look like. Eventually, this informed the legislation that created USIP in 1984. As I mentioned, our headquarters is located at the northwest corner of the National Mall. We have a lovely photo from the fall taken here. USIP's building is in the bottom left corner of the screen. I'll circle it with my mouse here. It has a very distinctive arched white roof over it, and you can see that we're very close to the National Mall. You see the Washington Monument cut off. It's quite tall, and so it's difficult to get a good photograph that gets it and the rest of DC in frame. You also see the US Capitol in the background with much of the National Mall right stretching between us, with some of those Smithsonian institutions further beyond the Washington Monument. And so we'll talk about this a little bit further about what USIP's location means by transitioning to our virtual peace trail. And so USIP's public engagement mandate is really to engage the public in USIP's work. And a couple of years ago, we thought, people visit Washington, D.C. all the time. They visit the National Mall monuments and memorials. And there's a peace story to be told here, too. I mentioned our location is right at that northwest corner of the mall. And we wanted to bring that story of this national commitment to peace to the visitor experience to the National Mall. And so the Peace Trail on the National Mall was born. If you will, let's take a short field trip to take a look at some of these sites. Okay, so we are looking at an overview of the virtual Peace Trail on the National Mall. By very brief way, to continue our USIP introduction, the USIP was set up with this mission to work on violent conflicts around the world. We have our headquarters in Washington, D.C., but we have a global presence. USIP is actively working on conflicts taking place in 90 different countries, with a long-term presence in 29 of those places. We also have this public engagement work, which I've talked about a little bit, including welcoming people to our headquarters in Washington, D.C., but working with communities around the United States as well. This includes work with K-12 communities and a dedicated program to working with teachers to talk about global peace building in their classrooms here in the US. So through this virtual tour, we're going to bring in some examples of USIP's own work that connect to key themes at some of the sites that we'll visit. You'll see here in the top left of the screen a map of Washington, D.C., and the gold box on the screen shows the area of focus for our tour today. This is the northwest corner of the National Mall. And we at USIP really think of this as the war and peace corner of our nation's capital. It's home to this country's most famous veterans memorials, which draw tens of millions of visitors each year. And then you'll see to the right of the screen an outline of the Peace Trail, which starts at our building at USIP and from there traces a path to a dozen other key sites in the vicinity, ending at the Washington Monument and bringing, again, this peace lens to the experience of visiting the National Mall. Generally speaking, this is a self-guided tour, but we're going to walk through some of it virtually together this evening. So our first stop on the Peace Trail is right in front of USIP's headquarters. We moved in here in 2011, and this is now the hub for our global work. This building supports our mission in several important ways. It's a venue for hosting global leaders for important public addresses. It's a convener for timely US policy conversations. It's a hub for on-site training programs, and it's a destination and a symbol for the American people. The image of a dove, which is a traditional symbol of peace, is suggested by the design of the roof, and it's a core element of USIP's seal or logo, which is etched into the plaza in front of the building. That seal is shown too in the top left corner of this screen. At the top of USIP's flagpole is another dove. It's actually a replica of the weather vane that was created as a symbol of peace at Mount Vernon, which was George Washington's home after the War of Independence. Our connection to President George Washington really goes back to his writings about creating a peace academy. As some may know, he was an individual who thought a lot about the democratic institutions that should form our young government, and one of those institutions was a peace academy. He also looked at a military service academy and drew up plans for those, which he eventually submitted articles for to Congress. We have West Point Academy today as a result of those efforts. He also came up with some ideas around a peace academy. And as we know, and as we'll explore a little later in the trail, had a lot of ideas about what the US should do for global peace. This building, our headquarters, is also striking on the inside. We know the architecture on the outside is unusual. When you come inside the building, it's a very light, bright space with internal bridges and really iconic meeting spaces. If you're ever in Washington, D.C., we'd love to have you over into the building. So from our USIP front step, we are going to take a trip, about 10 minutes walk from USIP's front steps to the Lincoln Memorial. The Lincoln Memorial honors the 16th president as a unifier who preserved the nation through the Civil War era and as an emancipator who, through his personal leadership and in partnership with peace builders like Frederick Douglass and other Black leaders, played a really key role in ending the institution of slavery. Visitors are primarily taken by the overall structure of this memorial, which was designed to resemble the Parthenon in Athens. It features ancient symbols of unity and strength in its architecture. This is a really imposing and a site that has real gravitas when you visit it. About halfway up the main staircase of the Lincoln Memorial is a flagstone plaque, which marks the spot where, during the March on Washington in 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. urged Americans, quote, to make real the promises of democracy in his iconic I Have a Dream speech. Pictured in the top left of this screen, you can see where that plaque is on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Inside the memorial, which we'll refer to the image in the bottom left and on the right side of the screen, are a few things that we like to talk about in reference to the Peace Trail. So inside the memorial, on the walls to the left and to the right of President Lincoln's statue, are two murals that really bring to life the core principles of his presidency. On one side, Unity, which is the top of the two mural images that you see here, features an angel of truth joining hands with two figures representing the North and the South. And on the other wall, Emancipation, which is the mural image at the very bottom, represents freedom and liberty, showing the angel of truth releasing enslaved people from bondage. Also inside the Lincoln Memorial are text from the Gettysburg Address and from Lincoln's second inaugural address, which is the one that's pictured on the right side of your screen, which concluded with Lincoln's famous call for national reconciliation at home and abroad. Quote, with malice toward none, with charity for all, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, and so on. When we visit this site with students, or when we have teachers come through who are taking their students, we all like to offer a discussion question for them to dig into some of these themes. And so a discussion question that we often will pose at this site is, what does it take to achieve reconciliation after a period of war? Now, of course, the Lincoln Memorial references much of the domestic reconciliation, US reconciliation that took place after the Civil War. But this is a question that has international resonance too. And reconciliation is something that students, we find, have a lot to say about. Very briefly, we like to talk about what this reconciliation work looks like at USIP and USIP's context. And the specific example that I want to mention just very briefly is in Colombia, where USIP works with a network of women mediators who are at the front lines of communities that are dealing with some really tough issues after 5 decades of conflict. Some of these issues include reintegrating ex-combatants or people who were actively involved in violent conflict, who have since put down their weapons and are committed to being part of the difficult work for a different future, moving forward in peace, and they're trying to implement their country's national peace agreement. USIP trains and supports local organizations, many of them are led by women like those pictured here, to build peaceful solutions for the inevitable conflicts that arise when peace agreements get implemented. In all of the place USIP works, reconciliation work looks a little different because it's really context driven, but at its core, it's about bridging divides and finding common ground that yields a path forward out of violent conflict. From the Lincoln Memorial, and just next to it is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. When you stand on the Lincoln Memorial steps, it's in front of you and to the left, just a few minutes walk to get there. That's our next stop. This is a really striking memorial, and its design is very different. Inscribed on its black walls, which are cut into the grass landscape, are the names of more than 58,000 men and women who died or were missing in action during that war. The design of this memorial was the result of a national competition in 1980, which called for a vision reflective in nature, which would harmonize with its surroundings, include the names of all who died or remained missing, and make no political statement about that war. This photo on the right gives you a sense of the memorial's layout. It's composed of 2 walls, with one pointing to the Washington Monument and the other pointing to the Lincoln Memorial. The architect, Maya Lin, noted, quote, by linking these 2 strong symbols for the country, I wanted to create a unity between the nation's past and present. She also noted later that the apolitical approach became, quote, an essential aim of her design, saying, quote, I feel like the politics had eclipsed the veterans, their service, and their lives. I wanted to create a memorial that everyone would be able to respond to, regardless of whether one thought our country should or should not have participated in that war. And in an address at this site in 1988, President Ronald Reagan noted that the memorial was a monument to, quote, living love, and that, quote, it reminds us of a great, profound truth about our nation, that from all of our divisions, we have always eventually emerged strengthened. So we're going to zoom back out to the trail view here and move to a site on the other side of the Lincoln Memorial, across from the reflecting pool, which is the Korean War Veterans Memorial. The Korean War was a combined United Nations military effort in which American men and women joined in action alongside 21 other countries, which are listed along the granite curb on the north side of the memorial. And the main inscription at the memorial, which is pictured in the top right, notes, quote, our nation honors her sons and daughters who answered the call to defend a country they never knew and a people they never met. Also engraved above the pool of remembrance, which is not pictured here, are the words, freedom is not free, encouraging visitors to reflect upon the sacrifices of that war. One of the themes, again, noting that this was a United Nations joint military effort and that many branches of the US military joined together in partnership, we like to draw out partnership as a theme to focus on at this memorial. And one of the examples we give about USIP's work is the partnerships that we have in our on-the-ground work. Wherever we're working, whether it's our headquarters in Washington or in the over 90 countries that we're working on around the world, we partner with local peace builders. And so when we bring students to this site, we encourage them to think about the importance of partnership. Some examples we give about our work includes with Congress, referring to the image in the top right with a USIP staff expert testifying in front of Congress. We partner with the military, referring to the photo in the bottom right corner. We also work with civil society and local frontline peace builders, referring to the image in the bottom left corner. We have lots of examples on our website and in our different media platforms that we share with students and teachers as they try and explore partnerships and what different partnerships can look like. And we compare that with some of the Peace Trail resources as well. Moving on, we have one last stop in our tour this evening. When we go out to the trail view, again, you can see that this whole Peace Trail covers about 12 different sites. If you were to walk the whole thing, depending on how long your legs are, how much water you brought, and how many questions you have to ask at each site, it can take about 2.5 to 3 hours. We've abbreviated the trail for brevity's sake this evening. The last stop that we'll do on tonight's tour is the Washington Monument. This iconic monument commemorates America's first president, and it's the centerpiece of the nation's capital. It was designed to be the tallest building in the world at that time, to represent Washington's visionary ideals and his immense contributions to the nation. Having served as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, again, he was a military man during the American Revolutionary War. In 1785, he expressed that his first wish was, quote, to see the whole world in peace. This quote appears inside the Washington Monument at the 490-foot level. We know from his writings that George Washington felt very strongly about peace. And in fact, upon returning to Mount Vernon, his Virginia home, after 9 long years of war, Washington designed and ordered a weather vane with a dove of peace, that dove of peace that you saw earlier, to sit at the very top of his home. This weather vane is also replicated, as I mentioned earlier, on the top of the flagpole at the U.S. Institute of Peace. So that brings us full circle, and it concludes this particular version of the virtual tour of the Peace Trail on the National Mall. I'm going to stop screen sharing to come back to the video here. There are a number of resources to help classes use the Peace Trail. There's a brochure, there is a resource and reference guide, there is an app for both iPhones and for Android phones. There's also an activity kit, which we developed so that teachers can help their classes engage in the moment with the Peace Trail. These are all free on usip.org. We anticipate updating these resources for 2026. So as we look forward to the 250th anniversary and all that entails, we really envision updating this resource so that students and classes who are visiting the mall, have a fresh take that they can bring with them as they're exploring the monuments and memorials. I do want to briefly mention our many other resources for K-12 audiences. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint to share just some of those. So our resources for teaching about peace building are really designed for K-12 audiences. And the approach that we take to teaching about peace building and global conflict to students, whether they are kindergartners or high schoolers looking at what they're going to study in college, or maybe thinking about their careers, really borrows from what we call the despair empowerment curve. And you can see that on your screen here. The despair empowerment curve starts with providing facts and information about the problem. Maybe this will be familiar to some of you teachers who are tuning in. We help students really dig into problems through our resources, right? Trying to understand the many layers and complexities of conflicts. Presenting those realities can often leave students feeling really despondent or unhopeful, right, about the state of global conflict. It often involves, right, looking at the impacts of things like war, right, or displacement. Looking at the effects of a changing climate or scarcity of resources. While we want students to confront the realities of global conflict, we want to give them tools for dealing with it, right? So that they end in a place where they feel empowered to be peace builders and continue studying and maybe working on some of these issues. And so you can see how some of the resources that USIP has helps them to deal with their feelings, to go deeply into the subject, to teach them strategies for conflict resolution with things like dialogue, and provide opportunities for them to continue working on the proactive and practical piece of this. Some of the resources that we have that I'd like to highlight include lesson plans, activities, multimedia, and more. USIP.org is a great resource to find those. We have professional development opportunities for teachers. Our flagship program for this is the Peace Teachers Program, which is a virtual professional development program designed to walk teachers through a lot of our lesson plans and curricula resources. We offer virtual guest speakers. For example, we have classes who are looking at, say, they're studying the Vietnam War in class. Well, USIP actively works on US-Vietnam reconciliation, and so our USIP colleagues who are doing that work in Vietnam and from here at USIP's headquarters will virtually talk to classes about what that work looks like and to talk about some of the legacies of the war and how they're still being dealt with today. We offer insights and analysis. We also welcome people to our headquarters. We, of course, offer the Peace Trail in the National Mall, but we also offer informational briefings and educational workshops. They're 1 hour, so when groups are coming through Washington, D.C., they can book a visit to USIP. Again, free to take us up on all of these resources. And then the last one that I'll mention on this slide is our online courses. Part of USIP's mandate was not only to do on-the-ground peace building work, research to public communities and to the government, but we also were mandated to educate and train people in the practical ways that conflict can be managed. And so one of the ways we do that today is through an online platform called the Gandhi King Online Academy. These online courses are free to take. They range from micro courses that take an hour or so to complete to courses that take closer to 40 hours or longer length. Many of these are self-paced resources, but we do offer some live-led courses as well. We are, for 2026, looking at building out educator spaces within that platform so that US educators can participate in discussion boards and connect with each other while they're taking these courses on the online platform. They can also be a resource through the platform to each other as well. One of our flagship educational resources that I'd like to highlight is the Peacebuilding Toolkit for educators. The first section of this looks at conflict as an inherent part of the human condition. I sort of teased that up front. The second part of this looks at the practical ways that violent conflict can be prevented. Many of those ways, right, are sort of hallmark peace building approaches: dialogue, mediation, negotiation, skills that are put into practice in violent conflict zones around the world, but are also skills that students can learn and start practicing today. And some of those are listed below here. For 2026, we are preparing new and updated resources for educators as well. Those include creating standards for teaching peace building. We're actually looking for educators to help us create those standards. So if you've been involved in curricula development or advising on creating teaching standards, our team is currently seeking experts to help us do that. We are also creating a new landing page on usip.org and a new catalog for our resources, particularly related to the Peace Teachers program that I mentioned. We also are working on a peace game simulation module. We hear a lot from teachers that simulation modules are something that work really well in classrooms. And so we've been working to create a peace game that can exist in that online course platform that I mentioned. We're hoping to be able to roll that out for 2026. So with that, there's a few ways, generally speaking, that you can stay engaged with USIP. Our public engagement team puts out a monthly newsletter, which you can sign up for. usip.org/us-schools is where you can find resources for US educators. USIP has a very robust roster of events and podcasts, which are on our website as well. And then we also like to flag that September 21st is the International Day of Peace, and every year USIP issues the Peace Day Challenge, inviting folks to do something in the name of peace. On that day, we have a lot of people take the peace trail on that day. We've even had people create a peace trail in their own local community, finding monuments locally that have connections to peace, and they sort of create that and then share it with their communities on September 21st. So I'll stop sharing my screen. We have covered a lot of ground, both literally through the virtual tour, I guess, and figuratively. And so I'd like to open up for questions from the group to see what are people curious about that we can answer.
You all have a lot of resources. That's really impressive to see all the different things that teachers can take advantage of. So thank you for sharing so much of your materials and things. I know I plan to go check it all out.
Thanks, Jen. We do try to create resources that are practical for teachers. Our team, members of our team have been teachers, so they know really well how busy teachers are, how much teachers have to do, and these are really designed to be as easy as possible to take up and plug into, lesson plans that already exist and to the curriculum that teachers, have to teach to. And we hope they're complementary, right, to what is already being covered in classrooms.
I love the peace trail idea in your own community. That seems really like a neat idea. Do you have any other, not to put you on the spot or anything, but examples of things you've heard about or results of projects maybe teachers have done, that just as an example of some things maybe some of your groups have done as a result of their experience at USIP?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned the Vietnam program. So a number of years ago, two or 3 years ago now, we had a peace teacher from Delaware who participated in our peace teacher program. And she, in the course of that, learned about USIP's Vietnam. It's called the Vietnam Reconciliation and War Legacies Initiative. again, another mouthful. This is a trend and a theme in Washington, right? We like lots of words.
We do.
But she learned about the work of the Vietnam team, and one of USIP's lesson plans helps students to research and learn about members of their local communities here in the US who were either missing in action during that conflict or maybe served, right? And so it's learning about how people in your local community may have been involved or affected by that conflict, and learn about, the legacies didn't just end in the 1970s, right? They're continuing today. Anyways, her class learned about the Vietnam program, and in the course of her participation in by virtue of meeting other contacts of USIPs and getting to know the Vietnam program, she was connected with an organization called the Two Sides Project, which works to bring together Americans whose parents served in the Vietnam War and Vietnamese whose parents were involved in the Vietnam War together for sort of people-to-people exchange projects. The Two Sides Projects also builds homes for Vietnamese families whose parents went missing in action during the conflict and were never found. It's all over the world, but was a particular issue in Vietnam as well. And so her class was really excited to learn about this project, and they ended up fundraising money to build a home for one of these families in Vietnam. And she and her students were able to travel to Vietnam to help build the home, as well as having fundraised for it. And again, was one of the ways that her participation in the program, not only was it instructive for her, but she was able to help empower her students to participate in the work today. I think a lot of times young people are sort of told, like, your time will come, you're the next generation, you're inheriting these problems, but they're not always cast as active participants in the world, or that they're seen as like having those opportunities now. And so this was a really great example, I think, of her students having a role as peace builders today.
Wow, that's amazing. That's powerful. Imagine them going to Vietnam and helping. Wow. Do you have a question about your building? Do you ever do tours there and or tours of the trail starting at your building?
Yeah, great question. Thank you so much, Lauren. I'm looking on the other side of my desk to reach for a different brochure, which is not the Peace Trail, but so we do invite or encourage folks to start the Peace Trail at USIP's headquarters. Generally speaking, those are self-led, though we have trained professional tour guides here in Washington on the Peace Trail content. So if you are booking a tour with a trail guide, with a tour guide in Washington, many of them do use our Peace Trail resources. A couple of times a year, we do offer led versions of the Peace Trail. And actually, one of those instances is this Friday coming up. If you happen to be in the Washington, D.C. area, USIP will have an open house on Friday, December 13th, and at noon and at 4 p.m., we're leading tours of the Peace Trail to do a few sites close by to USIP. When we do invite people into the building, whether it's for public events, we also have exhibits a few times a year. We have a monthly open house. We do offer self-guided tours of the building. And so this is the brochure I was reaching for. And you can explore different spaces in USIP's headquarters to learn about some of the symbolism that I alluded to, the lightness and brightness of the space. Because it is an active government workspace, you can't visit all areas. It's an office building and there are certain rules in place, but we do love to share about the building with people that come in. So exhibits, open houses, and then for groups that are visiting Washington, again, we do offer by appointment sort of information sessions, and people learn about the building in those as well.
After years of driving by, I finally came on over, I want to say last summer, and got to see the building, and it really is worth visiting if you haven't had the chance. And if find yourself here in Washington, it's definitely worth checking it out. And it's a really, I mean, you can call it an office building, but it's pretty neat. So
it is the most beautiful office space I'll ever work in, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And you got a pretty nice view too.
Yes. Yes, I'm quite lucky. It's so light filled that sometimes our security guards have to wear sunglasses because it can get quite bright in our main atrium space.
It's cool. And you often have the day I went for an open house, I think you have different speakers and things talking about their experiences. So there's like
Mhm.
always something going on, it seems, where you can
Yeah,
learn
that's
and
right.
hear about different experiences and things.
Yeah, through our open house series, we really try to personalize the work of peace building. So, in really practical, sort of basic terms, talk about what it's like to work in peace building. We also have events that are um, about the peace building work, and so those are sort of offered throughout the year, and they might feature, a foreign minister is coming through town to visit with the U.S. president. They want to make a public address of some sort. They often will use USIP spaces, and the public is invited in for those sessions. Sometimes US policymakers or members of Congress who are looking for a nonpartisan place to talk about an issue that they really care about will also come to USIP. Again, we're a nonpartisan institution, and so we can use our space and our platform to have difficult conversations, right? Because we're not affiliated with a party, we're not within the executive branch of government, so nothing about USIP's leadership or programs change when there's a new presidential administration. We can work really well with, lots of people and inviting lots of different perspectives into our building.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So you said mandated by Congress though, yes?
Yeah,
Interesting.
so we're a government institution in the sense that we were founded by Congress. We're also funded only by Congress.
Okay.
There was a one-time exception made so that we could raise public-private funds for the construction of the building. It was quite expensive, and Congress didn't want to foot that bill, quite understandably. So they did allow us to raise private funds for some of the building construction, but all of
Interesting.
our peace building projects are done through congressionally appropriated funds.
Very interesting. Great. Does anybody else have any other questions for Ellie? Anything else you wanted to know about USIP and their teacher resources? I'll talk slowly here, but thank you, Ellie, for sharing all of this information about your institute there and all the work y'all are doing on sharing these stories and teaching students about peace building and teachers as well. It's really impressive stuff. And I look forward for us hopefully being able to combine on some more projects since we're so close neighbor wise and we have similar themes here. So yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time to share all your information with us, and we look forward to working with you in the future. I'll make one more call for anyone on the call if you have any questions or comments or anything you want to ask or learn more about. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight or whenever you happen to watch this, and look forward to a few more sessions next year. How about that? Next year. So once again, thank you to Ellie from the United States Institute of Peace for sharing all of these wonderful resources with you. You got a big thank you from Lauren in the chat. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to the Trust for the National Mall for supporting this program for us and giving us the chance to reach out and share information like this with teachers. And we hope you'll consider a visit to the USIP. Go check out their dove crowned building, and now I have to go look for the flagpole too. I want to go check that out as well. Any parting words, Ellie?
I just want to express my thanks also. We really appreciate the opportunity to join with National Mall and Memorial Parks and with the Trust for the National Mall. And we're just so, grateful to be neighbors. And Thank you to the folks who've tuned in also, and reiterating, you're very welcome to SIP, and we do hope that you explore the Peace Trail the next time you're in Washington.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. And we appreciate all of your time this evening or whatever time it is. And yeah, we'll catch you next month. We'll be back second Tuesday in January for another Teach 250 series. I'm going to leave you hanging with not even a teaser. So you'll have to check back with us and see what we're talking about next month. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful evening.